some of which are mentioned while others are not mentioned in Australian Constitution, and the relationship between government and the citizen. Of course, the way political parties shape the functions of the Australian Constitution and many of its institutions, all this can be comprehended only by studying constitutional framework of Australia. Okay, these constitutions are made by the people, made by the political parties. Okay, so these constitutions make the rules, make says about rules, regulations, principles, and how to deal with every matter. What are the power of the government? What are the power of the government institutions? And what are the power of the people? What type of rights they have? Everything is mentioned in this constitution. Okay. Objectives. Identity the principles incorporated the Australian Constitution of 1901, the constitutional power of Australian Senate. What are the powers of the Australian Senate? We will study on it. The constitutional crisis, the decline of role of Australian Parliament and revival of the Senate, and the failure of the referendum and Republican in 1990. We will discuss it. Right. Making of the Constitution and constitutional principles. It is important to note that the Australian Constitution is the result of many ideas and aspirations, interests and goals, with the six British colonial colonies had in 1990s, 1890s. Australian Constitution shaped by variety of interests, aspirations and goals. In 1890s, six, just like to remember, six Six British colonies had 1890s. They have these self-governing and virtually independent colonies had their own constitutions. Previously, these six colonies had their own constitution, system of law, practice, and government. Above all, their own distinct economic interest. They have different their own written or unwritten principles, constitutions, and so on. So to serve better their interest and aspirations, they decided to form a national government. Who decided? That six colonies. That six colonies decided to form national government. At the same time, protect their various colonies and their interest. They, that six colonies, want to be national government as well as they also want to protect their own interest. They were influenced by two main ideas: the parliamentary form of government, which is also called responsible government, prevalent in Britain as well as in American colonies. Okay, they influenced by the parliamentary system, the responsible government, and Australian constitution frameworks were also influenced by the example of federalism in the American Constitution. Like in US, federalism was adopted since it establishes a national commonwealth government while maintaining at the same time the identity and autonomy of the constitution member states. Okay. So in the introductory part of constitutional principles, we just know that British, we just know that uh, the Constitution, the Australian Constitution, where what the Australian constitutions were based want to be parliamentary form of government, as well as the Australian government is believed in responsible government, as well as They believed in the federal system like in America. So, before going to know about the responsible government and federalism, what is it? We should ask this question to ourselves. Responsible government means a parliamentary form of government. Parliamentary form of government means where the parliamentarians or the government is responsible in every sector. Whatever happens in the state, it should be the state or the government should be responsible. Take responsibility and find out the solution if there is a problem. And what is federalism? Federalism means there is a dual type of government, that is the local government or the regional government and the national government. There are also federalism means there are also two types of constitutions, that is the state constitution or regional constitution as well as the national constitution. There are also two types of citizenship. There is citizenship of uh, a particular state and the citizenship of nation. But in India, there is no dual citizenship, there is no dual constitution, but, but there is a dual government. Okay, that's why Kessiware says that India is quasi-federal state. In our constitution, there is nowhere mentioned that India is a federal state. But the features of constitutions hints that Indian constitution is partially federal and partially unitary. That's why it's quasi-federal. We are discussing on Indian constitution. The constitutional structure. In the US, 13 independent countries had come together to form as a national government without, however, desire to relinquish either their identity or autonomy. This is how federalism was born in US. It was nearly the similar spirit in Australia when, in 1890s, the existing colony decided to come together to form a national government while maintaining at the same time their separate identity and autonomy. Okay? In US, in Britain, in Australia, colonies shows the interest to make a nation. Small colonies have their own identification, have their own power, but these colonies are not so much power in every sector, but they have some power in few sectors. So these colonies decided to cooperate to each other and share their power and energy to each other, and this can be possible through the integration to make a national government where each and every colonies will share their power and energy, as well as they will establish a strong relationship. At the same time, they want to make their own dignity, their identification, their own interest, that one interest should not be neglected. Okay, these are the background of the integration of colonies to create a national government. Security against external aggression and economic interest, especially trade, had convinced the colonies of need for a national government. Besides agreeing to a national government, the colonies were also responding to the emergence of incipient Australian nationalism. But these colonies also show interest, make a strong business, strong trade, to to make a strong national government with the agreement of the national government. Emergence of, and these things are made the idea of Australian nationals. Okay, formal process of constitution making had begun in 1890s with the convening of Australian Conference, comprising of 6 colonies and New Zealand, which had resolved the favour of a union of colonies. Protected negation and discussion had followed, and in 1897 a second convention without New Zealand, this time made to consider a revised draft federal constitution and decide to send a colonial parliament for approval. In the year of 1898 and 1899, various referendums were held, and after some delay on the part of colonial parliament, the draft constitution was finally accepted by all the 6 colonies in 1900. Okay, the formal process. How to start a national government. The formal process began in 1890s. Protected negation and discussion followed, and 1897 a second convention without New Zealand, this time made consider revised draft federal constitution. If you remember, try this. These years, 1890s, 1897, what happened, 1898, 1899, and finally 1900. In 1901, the constitution adopts a federal form of government. Just 1901, constitution adopted federal form of government, government with the national government being called the Commonwealth government. National government called as Commonwealth government in 1901. As you will study in details in Unit 6, the Commonwealth Constitution, like all federal constitution, has both centralizing and decentralizing feature. Okay, there are different types of provisions. The federal constitution are invariably difficult. Federal constitutions are invariably difficult to alter or amend. It is so because the federal constitution is a sort of compact between and among the states and the federal government. So the procedure to amend the federal constitution is very rigid. It cannot be easily changed. Moreover, federalism in US, United States or America, was considered as a kind of guarantee against despotic and arbitrary rule. The Australian Commonwealth Constitution provides for a popular referendum in case of amendment. Section 128 requires that a law to amend the Constitution must be passed in the referendum with the support of majority of voters throughout the Commonwealth and by a majority of voters in a majority of states. Indeed, it is difficult to complex process. So far, only 8 of the 44 attempts by referendum to change the provisions of the Constitution have succeeded. I hope you got it what I want to say. The procedure of amending the Constitution means it must be passed by the people, it must be supported by the people, and for this, the procedure of referendum was introduced. I hope you know the meaning of referendum. Referendum means view to take the view of the people as well as take the view of different colonies. If that was supported by the people or the colonies people, then that will when it is get the majority, then that amendment can be succeeded, neither it cannot be succeeded. So here you can see that only 8 Only 8 amendments are so far amended out of 44 acts. There are other federal features too in Commonwealth in constitutions. Most of most important, these include a Senate upper house and independent judiciary with power of judicial review and a constitutional division of power. You must know that there can be variations in federation in terms of power and function of the upper house, the scope of judicial review, and the pattern of division of power. The constitution is based on judicial review. I hope you know this. It's judicial review, division of power, decentralization of power. Australian Parliament and the Constitution. From the ever, what emerged is that Australian Constitution establishes a responsible government. Thus, it is expected that Parliament shall control the executive at the same time. Thus, it is expected that Parliament shall control the executive at the same time, since parliamentary form is designed to work in a federal type of government. There are some typical Australian constitution provisions and practices. The Australian constitution establishes a parliament of two houses and gives the considerable power. Sits in the 150 members lower House of Representatives are appointed between state in proportion of their population, with a minimum of 5 seats of each of the states. And stated earlier, each of the state is presented of the principles of equality in the Senate. Okay, in in America there are 2 seats for each state, shows the equality. In Australia, we can see here that they have minimum of 5 seats for each state. Okay? 5 seats for each state. As stated earlier, each of the state is presented on the principles of equality in the Senate. Section 24 requires that the House of Representatives should not be more than twice the size of Senate. The total strength of Senate is 76 members. Dear listeners, if you want, just make some notes on it. Senate is 76 members. The term of House of Representative is 3 years. This is also important. We need to remember the term House of Representative is term 3 years. Okay. Unless there is a mid-term election, the senator elected for a period of 6 years. In India, the same system introduced Rajya Sabha that they have 6 years. In such a manner that half of the senators are elected every 3 years, thus making it continuing chamber, permanent chamber or continuing chamber. The Senate, the upper house. Member of House of Representatives are elected by a system known as the preferential voting under the voter vote bank candidate in order to preference. The power of the both houses are identical except the regard of financial matter. The senator cannot initiate or amend a financial bill, but it can request the House of Representatives to amend the bill, and most of important bill can be reject the bill. Same process in India. Lok Sabha is much more powerful in matter of financial bill. Rajya Sabha is less powerful, and Australia there is also Senate is much more powerful, and Lok Sabha is not powerful. In case the House of Representatives has passed a bill twice and the Senate has rejected it, with the intervening gap of 3 months, twice the Prime Minister can advise the Governor General uh, on a double dissolution. That means what are we saying? Joint sitting. Following the double dissolution election, if the same legislature is again rejected the Senate, it called be joint sitting in the parliament for the same, but this time still not resolve the deadlock. Since 1901, there have been only six double dissolutions, elections, and one joint sitting, but in all, only three times the government had. Referendum and debate for republic. There are three ways in which the Australian constitution can be altered or amended. Division of power can be simply be changed by the referral of power. A state can refer matters to the Commonwealth, that is, a state or states can be code their legislative power. Thus, the federal division of power can vary from state to state. For instance, in 1977, the government of Tasmania and South Australia had referred to national government the ownership of their state railway system. The constitution permits the admission of or creation of new states under such terms and conditions of Commonwealth thinks fit. Thus, a new state may not have the same level of representation, for instance, in the Senate. The Constitution guarantees equal representation in the Senate only to original states. The Northern Territory has been demanding quite some time is that it should become the seventh state on the grounds of equality of representation in the Senate. Referendum and the debate for a republic. Previously, I have told you that what is referendum. Referendum means take the view of the people of a particular area or a particular nation in some legal matter to pass a particular bill or in few make on few matters of making constitutional provisions or to making rules, regulations and principles to take the view of the people. That is known as referendum. Then what is the meaning of republic? Republic means the constitutional head. The constitutional head, the constitutional head of a particular state. The constitutional head of the particular state should not be based on election system, should not be based on hereditary system, but he or she should be elected and for a particular period. Elected for a particular period. And it should not be a hereditary system. That procedure, that system, we can say that is the republican system. The constitution has borrowed the Swiss method of altering the constitution, which is direct and electorated based. It is a complex procedure which is likely to result more in the failure rather than success of the proposed change. There are two stages in the amending procedure. A bill for an amendment must first be passed by an absolute majority in both the House of National Parliament. If one house rejects the proposal or passes it with less than an absolute majority, and the other house passes the bill twice, the Governor General has the authority to declare the bill as available for the next stage. Okay. Summary. The Australian Constitution provides for a federal parliament form of government. Dear listeners, try to remember these key words. It will helpful to you. Federal parliamentary form of government. As a result, Australian government is called a hybrid form of government. In the case of Australia, Australian constitution deadlocks often arise because of upper house fights. The Senate has been granted equal power, which includes power to reject any bill, include the money bill, which may have already been passed by the lower House of Representatives. As the constitutional crisis in 1975 illustrates, the Senate is thus able to check and even challenge a prime minister to enjoy the majority support in House of Representatives. In this regard, adherence to the convention which have been borrowed from Britain or those that have evolved in Australia are very important. However, it has been noted that the mainstream political parties in Australia in their power political game go beyond this convention and produce a constitutional crisis through their behavior as they did in 1975. Due to the fact that election of the Senate take place on the basis of proportional representation system. What is proportional representation? We'll discuss later. There are this point proportional representation system, preferential election system. We'll discuss in it. There is a points in ahead. Okay. It is unlike that the same party coalition and parties that has majority in the lower house shall also be able to secure a majority in the Senate. One can safely say that minority parties and independents shall continue to hold the balance of power in the Senate. Such situation has led to what some experts call it revival of the Senate. The Senate is a legislative body, but due to its pattern of comprehension, it is able to scrutinize government's legislative initiative and also keep a close watch to the government expenditures. This is deemed important as the parliament in Australia, like in all other parliamentary democracies, has a variety of reason decline in the roles and the functions. Likewise, the process of altering amendment, the Australian constitution is very complex. It involves referendum. Any proposed amendment requires a double majority and overall majority of popular votes in favor and majority in favor in a majority of states. It means that a referendum should be voted yes in at least four of six states. If four states accepted the referendum, then that will succeed. But it is not easy. Excluding in the NT and ACT, the matter of declaring Australia as a republic is old as well as the constitution itself. In 1999, referendum had two issues: the direct election and the president who would be the head of the state in place of the governor general. And secondly, the preamble that would be defined and decline the national identity and aspirations of Australia. The referendum had failed. Many reasons have been cited for the failure of 1999 referendum, and in fact, of all the past referendums, this has made an amendment of constitution extremely difficult. Many scholars are of the view that the Australian constitution now contains many anachronistic provisions. So far, only 8 of the proposed 44 amendments have made success and have all been for minor nature. Inconsistent state of the political parties on crucial issue of constitutional importance and the way of the government present the proposal constitutional changes, the electorate are held responsible for both the periodic constitutional deadlocks and the many archaic provisions that are still retained in the constitution. Now we'll discuss in 6 federalism in Australia. Australia, like India and Canada, is both federal and parliamentary democracy. In 1900, when Australia adopted the federal constitution, it was history of economic and political independence in the federating colonies. Australia founding father, while trained in the working of the British Westminster model, however, quite attract to the American federal model. Thus, the six government governing British colonies while becoming the constituent British state of the federal system, ensuring that the state would not be subordinate to the central power. We're discussing on federalism. As you previously discussed that what is federalism. Federalism means there are two types of government. There is a state government and a there is just two types of government. There is a state government and a central government or a national government. Okay, there are two types of uh, constitution, and the constitutions are written constitution, the constitution of nation, a constitution of a particular region or a state. The federalism in Australia, how it was started? It was started by the six colonies. They interested, they saw their interest to be united and make a national government, and also they want to keep their own interest in matter of nation, so that they can be they can be grow stronger, they can be develop themselves. That's why they made this type of group, and this type of groups is known as federal system, which is prevails in America, in Australia. Let's come to the background. At the time of framing of Australian Constitution in the Convention of 1891 and 1897 and 1898, support for a federal rather than a unitary constitution was almost unanimous. An altering system of unitary government and sovereign national parliament was championed by some of the rising Labour Party leader, but the Labour Party had no say in the founding conventions and had little influence over the making of the constitution. Federalism was an extension of a democratic government governance that accommodated existing colonies of similar political culture and structure, but of unequal size. Another possibility would, have- would have been for the colonies of remains as a separate quasi-independent state and join an impartial federation that some were championing at the time. But this had little public or popular support in Australia or indeed within the British Empire. Nature of federalism and division of power. In the designing of in the designing the Australian Constitution, the founder embraced the rework of federal model, copied mainly from the American Constitution. The system, they copied from American Constitution. Okay, copied from American Constitution. The comprise this was the institutions of the parliament and the responsible government familiar to the British. Somehow it is influenced by the American system as well as it was influenced by the British colonial practice system, producing the hybrid of parliamentary and federal government. Federalism in Australia, thus the Brian Gallagher writes, was a timely extension of self-governance of the national sphere. It preserved the colonies as the states along with their established system of local government and continue Australia's membership of the British Empire. Local government was not mentioned in the constitution because it came within the state jurisdiction, a fact that some would like to have reserved through constitutional recognition. Imperial member colored the way in which the executive was structured in formal monarchical terms with a vice legal surrogate, making the task modern republican technical complex. Within the continuing tradition and arrangements of Australian colonial government, federalism, according to Brian Gallian, was a process of nation building on the federal basis. The federal system adopted by the founders divided the power of a government between the federal and the national sphere and the sub-national provisional sphere. The national government was given the defined power either exclusive or the concurrent, whereas the state retained the residual in the federal system. Residual power are in the hands of state government, but in India, residual power are vested in central government or the national government. Division of power. As per the general principles of federalism, the Australian Constitution provides the division of executive, legislative, and some of its extent judicial power between the Commonwealth, central government, and the states, largely from the American model of founding father, gave to the central government defined power, either exclusive, concurrent, whereas the state retained the residual concurrent power, and some of we can say the exclusive power are given to the state central government, and state government retain the residual power. But the Australian colonial original agreed to as a weak central government with a few and limited power to the common interest, leaving the self-governing power to the colonies untouched the most matter. Most of the powers are given to the state government, and the center is less powerful. Financial relationship. With regard to financial power, as per the Constitution and the Commonwealth and the state have full power to tax of their one purpose, with a few exceptions. They are the power to impose customs and excise duties belongs to exclusive to the Commonwealth. Commonwealth means national. Commonwealth tax law cannot discriminate against state or part of states. Neither spheres of government can tax the other's property. Neither level of a government can tax or impose the discriminatory burden on the interstate trade. The state cannot impose tax beyond their limits. From the very beginning, the Australian Federation has characterized by fiscal imbalance. This has worsened over time. According to Charlie Saunders, initially the cause was the inability of the states to impose custom and excise duties. Two factors particularly explain. Okay. Dual judiciary. In the spirit of judiciary, also Australian Constitution provides for the dual system of court. Expect the two respect. First, the High Court of Australia. There are dual type of court system. First one is first the High Court of Australia. The Australia highlights courts, highest courts is the final court to appear. Both the federal and the state jurisdiction. It is also extensive original jurisdiction in significant federal matter, including constitutional matter. Second, the Constitution allow Commonwealth Parliament to concur the federal jurisdiction on the state courts. Commonwealth Parliament to confer federal jurisdiction on state courts. Section 77 triple I. The power was used extensively during the first 70 years of federation, but towards the end of the 20th century, this use decreased as the Commonwealth implemented a court hierarchy on its own. This departure from a dualist model, coupled with the appellate role of the High Court, has had significant effect. The highest court has held that the Constitution provides some protection for the integration of the states court as a potential recept of federal jurisdiction. The court structure also has contributed to the view of Australia as a unified common law, although statutory law varies between states. But centralization. Australia's founding father, its films were some committed federalists, as Peter H. Russell writes. They certainly knew more about federalism, among other things. They had the Canadian model to compare with the American model. They were most attractive to the American model because, in form, it seemed uh, too much truer to the requirement of federal theory than excused those provisions of the British North America Act, Canada that appear to make the Canadian provinces a subordinate to the coordinate level of the government, the central government, disallowance and reservation with the respect of provincial legislature, its power to appoint provisional lieutenant governors and the judges of the higher provincial court, and its responsibility for the protecting minority rights in the provinces. Australia's constitution makers established an American-style Senate with an equality of representation of the states, while in the dividing legislative power reserved the Canadian arrangements by leaving the residual power of the states. Constitutional amendments. Amendment procedure provided by the Australian Constitution is reasonably difficult. Does it require the passage of referendum by the majority? Previously, I have told this. The voter nationwide and majority of the voters in its last four of the six states, only 8 out of 36 proposed amendments submitted to the referendum have passed into law. Some of these, however, have increased Commonwealth power in one way or the other, and some significantly. The first amendment approved rather minor housekeeping changes in terms of the election and senator. The second, 1910, empowering the Commonwealth to take over state debts whenever they occur, was of greater significance. But the next step in 1988, 1946 made major changes in Australian federalism. In 1928, amendment gave constitutional status to the Commonwealth state agreement, replacing per capita grants to the state with Commonwealth contribution to the discharge of their debts and establishing loan council to the coordinator borrowing by the two levels of government. The Loan Council gave the Commonwealth Government a means of controlling state budgetary policy, perhaps more than was appreciated at the time. In 1946, amendment approved with multi-persistent support extend the power of the Commonwealth Parliament in the social welfare field on maternity allowances, widows' pensions, child endowment, unemployment, pharma- pharmaceuticals, sickness, and hospital benefits. Judicial support. Formation. The formative year of the Commonwealth, the majority of the High Court constructed the Constitution largely in the manner of the intended by the founder. They held that as the Constitution was a federal one, it followed that the Commonwealth and the state were free from the interference and control of each other. Lucius as the result of the doctrine known as implied immunity. It was held that the state could not levy any income tax, on the salaries of Commonwealth officers, and the Commonwealth could not subject state railways to the machinery and federal industries. Among the judges, there is a minority view that the construct the Commonwealth power broadly without regard to what reduce of power remain with the state authority. Soon the minority view stated becoming the majority view. In 1920, the engineers case brought about the decisive changes in the construction of the constitution. The effect of this change, according to the Leslie Janes, the comparable in many ways to that which occurred in the United States at the beginning of the Franklin D. Roosevelt second term of office. It is open the way to a considerable expansion of a central power. The particular issue in the case